I've spent over 10,000 hours learning everything I can about sound design. Now, I'm sharing it all with you. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to sound design every aspect of your video, from music that invokes emotion, to sound effects that create an immersive experience, to the tiniest, quietest little sound effects that you might think are insignificant. Every single piece of audio is incredibly important. Let's take a look at this scene from Kingsman, for example. What if we were to change the sound design? How would it affect the scene? Now, that was an extreme example, but it brings us to my first point. The music and sound effects that you choose dramatically affect the feeling and emotion of your videos. Just because you need a whoosh sound effect, it doesn't mean that you can just choose any old whoosh. You need to spend time picking the right music and the right sound effects for the right situations. But that example was for a movie. How do you transfer that to YouTube? Well, that brings us to my second point. Why shouldn't you think of your YouTube videos in the same way as movies? Like, why shouldn't you put in that much effort? Now, granted, there are some videos where that approach really isn't necessary. If you're making chill vlogs like Emma Chamberlain, then you really don't need any crazy sound design or anything. It's pretty much just going to be your personality and then the music behind it. But if you're making entertainment stuff like Mr. Beast or documentaries like Dodford, or basically any highly edited videos, then your sound design has to be on point. Now, before we get into actually doing some sound design, I want to give you a few really important tips. First, organization. Before you even start doing any sound design, or even editing for that matter, you should really make sure that everything you're using is super organized. Everyone has a different way of organizing stuff, but this is what I do. When I first download a sound effect, it goes into a folder that represents that sound. So whooshes go into the whoosh folder, risers into the riser folder. You get the point. Then if you're working in Resolve, I'd recommend creating power bins for all of your sound effects. If you can't see your power bins, just click this menu right here and show power bins. Now, all of your sound effects will be right there in Resolve in all of your projects. If you're not working in Resolve and your software doesn't have something like power bins, then creating folders in your media pool is just as good. High quality sound effects. There's a bunch of different places you can find sound effects. Some are free, some are paid. The free sites like YouTube Sound Library or Pixabay can be okay, but you'll probably find that there's limited options and most aren't very high quality. The paid options, on the other hand, will give you a lot more options and a lot higher quality. These are sites like Epidemic Sounds, Artlist, or my brand new sound effect pack. And this isn't like most of the other packs out there where it's all just whooshes, pops, glitches, all of those generic YouTube sound effects. This pack has all of that stuff and 100 times more. With punches and kicks, massive percussion, suspenseful drones and risers, and literally anything you could ever need, it's in there. Now, let's start doing some sound design. We're gonna have a look at the sound design from one of my favorite YouTube creators, Michelle Carre. And we're gonna be using one of her recent videos. I trained like a black belt for 90 days. We've got 7 main pieces of sound design for this edit. The first piece of sound design we have is the movement sound. For every punch and kick is gonna be like a whoosh or a cloth sound effect. So right here, we've got like a big kick. And because it's a big kick, we want it to sound really powerful. So you might think that you would use like a really big, powerful whoosh. But this feels sort of fake and unnatural. So let's find something a little bit more subtle. And then later on, we can use a different element to make it sound really powerful. I think this one's perfect. It's super subtle, but it's going to work really well within the mix of things. We can maybe turn this up by like 3 dB. Now we've got a bunch more of like taekwondo moves, kicks and punches and whatnot. And for that, we're going to use some cloth sound effects. So these sound like a little bit close to the camera from my feeling. So what we're going to do is just add a little bit of reverb onto them to push it back a little bit in the mix and make it feel like they're outside and a bit further away. So all we're going to do is compound all these and then add a reverb tool. We're going to use this plugin called Protoverb, which is just a simple reverb plugin. So for this, let's see what it's sounding like. It's a little bit tinny. Bring the decay up a bit, bring the wet down a bit more, and the dry all the way up. Bring the decay down a bit more. And I think that's sounding pretty good. It just gives the sound a bit more of a natural feel within the context of all the other sounds around it. Now we've just got a bunch more cloth and whoosh sounds for some more taekwondo moves, and then just sounds of the students tying up their belts. And that is all the movement sounds done. Now that we've got all those movement sounds done, we need the sounds of the impacts from those movements. So from all the punches and kicks. Then we need the sounds of these bricks being broken. And we want this to sound really powerful. So we're going to use a few different elements all layered on top of each other. First, there's this punch sound effect. Then there's the sound of this concrete breaking. Then there's this explosion. And finally, this big drum. Now all of these together create this really powerful feeling punch. And I think that's sounding pretty good, and it highlights a really good tip for doing sound design. Just because a sound effect isn't typically what an action would sound like, it doesn't mean it's wrong to use that sound. A punch would never sound like this explosion, but it lets the audience feel how powerful it was. Even though it's not realistic, it makes perfect sense in this context. Now we've got some shouts from all the students doing their taekwondo moves, and we're just going to use the original shouts because as far as I can tell, they're all recorded on set, and it's always good to use stuff that you can record live on set. Now we need some more ambient sounds that just sit in the background. This sound design might seem sort of insignificant, but it really helps draw the audience in and create an immersive experience. Next, we've got the sound of this flag flapping. You can see there, it just really helps draw you into the video with sounds that are really easily recognizable. Now onto the transitions and edited elements like risers and impacts and all the stuff like that. These are what help create suspense and tension in your edits. Now onto my favorite part of the sound design process, music and musical elements. And I say musical elements because we're not really using any full songs for this edit, more using a collection of samples that sort of sound like a song. You'll get what I mean in a minute. It's basically just built up of drums and cymbals. And then we've just got a few loops and samples that I pulled out of some stems, like these Himalayan sounds. Next, we've got this drum and percussion section, which again, I just pulled out of some stems, and this brings so much energy into the edit. Then I chopped up the sample to create some built-in drums and really rise the tension. Now finally, we can add the voiceover back in and let's see how this sounds. But before we do that, let's have a listen to the original from Michelle Carre.
Taekwondo, the way of foot and fist. The Korean martial art of unarmed self-defense. I have always seen Taekwondo as a superpower, wielded by only those who are willing to do what it takes. The average student's journey to achieving a black belt takes 3 to 5 years, but could the right student with the right master earn it in only 90 days?
And here's mine.
Taekwondo, the way of foot and fist. The Korean martial art of unarmed self-defense. I have always seen Taekwondo as a superpower, wielded by only those who are willing to do what it takes. The average student's journey to achieving a black belt takes 3 to 5 years, But could the right student with the right master earn it in only 90 days?
So now that's sounding pretty good, and I definitely think it matches up to the standard of Michelle's edit. But there's still more you can do to bring your sound design to the next level. You might think that mixing is just adjusting audio levels, and while that is a massive part of it, there's so much more to it. Reverb. Reverb isn't just for making that big echoey sound. It's also great for placing things in your scene. That might sound a little bit confusing, but let me show you what I mean. Let's say there's something in your background that you need to add sound design to. You can't just drop in a sound effect and leave it like that. It would sound really out of place. So you can add some reverb to it to push it back in the mix and make it feel like it's further away. See how much of a difference that makes in making the sound feel more natural? EQ. EQing or equalizing might look a little bit confusing, but once you understand how an EQ works, it's actually super simple. The basics of an EQ is to boost or reduce certain frequencies in a sound. If you've got too much bass in your voice, you can bring down the low end. You can make something sound like it's coming out of a radio by cutting the highs and lows and boosting the mids. Or if you want your voice to sound more clear and cut through the mix more, you can give it a boost in the clarity range. Depending on your voice, the clarity range is usually 2 kilohertz and above. Compression. Compression is another one of those things that can be sort of tricky to understand, but here's a quick breakdown. A compressor is used to reduce the dynamic range of a piece of audio. So let me show you this in a more visual way. Here, we've got a set of dialogue with a good mix of quiet and loud parts. There are 5 settings you need to be aware of. Threshold. The threshold is the level at which the compressor starts working. So if the threshold is set at -15 dB, anything that goes above that threshold will be compressed. Ratio. The ratio is the amount of compression that happens once the audio goes above the threshold. If the ratio is set at 2:1, then every 2 dB above the threshold will result in only 1 dB of gain at the output. So if the audio raises 10 dB above the threshold, it will be compressed down to 5 dB. Knee. The knee is basically fading in when the compressor turns on as it gets closer to the threshold. So with a hard knee, where the lines corner sharply, anything under the threshold won't be compressed at all, and anything over the threshold, the compressor will be turned all the way on. Whereas with a soft knee, as the audio gets closer to the threshold, the compressor will gradually come on. Attack and release. Attack is how long the compressor takes to turn on after hitting the threshold. Release is how long the compressor takes to stop compression after dipping below the threshold. Makeup. Because the compressor only affects what's above the threshold, the louder parts of the audio become quieter. This is what the makeup gain is for, to bring back some of that gain lost during compression. So as you can see here, the top sample is before compression and the bottom is after. The loudest parts have been brought down while the quietest parts have been brought up. Panning. Panning is a great trick for creating some realism in your sound design. Like when you're sitting in a movie theater and you can actually hear something like a vehicle or spaceship coming in from one side of the screen and going out the other. Now, onto my favorite part of the sound design process, music. Music is the main thing that creates all the energy and emotion in your videos. So if there's a sad scene, you could use something like this. Or if there's a happy scene, use something like this. Or to create a feeling of suspense, you could use something like this. All of this was the same footage, but just by changing the music, you can interpret that footage in multiple different ways. That's how much your music choices matter. If you put a happy song with some sad footage, it's going to give your audience the wrong feeling and they won't be able to connect with your video. And giving your audience something to connect with is one of the best ways to keep your audience's attention. Therefore, higher retention rates. Now that you've chosen your music, you can't just drop it in and be done with it. First, it's probably way too loud. So let's bring the levels down a bit so it's not overpowering the dialogue and sound effects. Even if you don't have any dialogue in your scene, you usually don't want your music at full volume. You don't want your viewers to be watching and suddenly get their eardrums blown out by super loud music they weren't expecting. Now that we've got the levels right, you need to find the right in and out points, as you most likely won't have the same song running for the whole video. Songs are structured in pretty specific ways, where changes usually come every 4, 8, or 16 bars. I mention this because the starting points of your songs are usually at those 4, 8, or 16 bar intervals. These intervals will generally be where a chorus or a verse starts. Now, the ending points of your song sort of more dependent on your edit and the song you're using. An abrupt stop in music is great for highlighting a moment in your video. Whether it be an important point or a funny moment, that abrupt cut in music really catches your viewer's attention. Now, if you want a cleaner cut to signify the end of a segment, here's a few things you can do. The first and most obvious thing would be to choose a song that has a natural stopping point that lines up with the end of a segment. But if the song you're using doesn't line up, here's how to fix that. First, cut the song where needed. Then, find a spot where a part of the song naturally ends. Cut this section and line it up where you need the music to cut, making sure to match the timing. Now, if the song ends abruptly, here's a little trick you can use to make it sound a whole lot better. Cut the song at the last hit where you want it to end. Now extend the clip and create a volume keyframe to duck the audio to silence immediately after that last hit. Now highlight this and create a new compound clip. Now drop reverb on this clip and add a really long decay time. Just play around with your reverb settings until you get the sound that you want. And that is everything you need to know to create some of the best sound design in the game. And now that your sound design is on point, click right here to learn 5 cuts that every editor should know to create a clean edit.